15,000 feet down, 4.5 kilometers at the bottom of the ocean, rests the battered hulk of a ship. This was the home of 33 people. Now it's the haunt of deep-sea fish. El Faro was once a workhorse cargo ship that reliably plied a route between Puerto Rico and Florida. But in 2015, something cataclysmic happened. A monstrous storm overcame El Faro and sent her to the bottom with her entire complement of crew. The loss left many questions unanswered in the minds of families and investigators alike. What had happened to send this relatively modern ship under? And why had nobody survived? The investigation, and the answers it turned up, would send shockwaves through the maritime industry and remind us of a valuable lesson: that mankind and our inventions are never immune to the power of nature. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your friend Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs, and this is the harrowing true story of the ship that disappeared into the eye of a hurricane, the SS El Faro. In the fall of 2015, the bustling port of San Juan was awaiting yet another cargo shipment from Jacksonville, Florida. The vessel tasked with this journey was the SS El Faro, a ship with a seasoned crew of 33 men and women. As they departed Florida on September 29th, no one could have foreseen that this would be the ship's final voyage and a journey that would end in tragedy. The El Faro was an ocean-going veteran. Launched back in 1975, she'd been built by Sun Shipbuilding in Chester, Pennsylvania, and had sailed under various names throughout her long career. At 790 feet, 240 meters long, and nearly 32,000 tons, she was built to endure, to transport cargo between the US and mainland Puerto Rico. Interestingly, she was powered by a steam turbine, not a diesel engine like most modern cargo vessels are. Her reputation was one of rugged reliability, a ship that had faced countless storms and treacherous seas for decades and had always emerged the victor. But by 2015, the El Faro was an aging vessel, and her once gleaming hull showed signs of wear and tear. Still, El Faro, which in Spanish means the lighthouse, was more than just a ship to her crew. Like all of the thousands of large cargo vessels that cross the world's oceans, she was a steadfast companion, but most importantly, she was a home away from home. The El Faro's journey from Jacksonville to San Juan was a route the ship had taken many times before. It would see her thread her way through the Atlantic, steaming north of the Bahamas, and on a southeasterly course that would bring her and her load of goods, including cars and shipping containers, to the island. Her owner, Tote Maritime, was about as old as El Faro was, and had an extensive fleet of ships, including the vessel's near-identical sister, El Yunque. The voyage was routine, and the crew, led by Captain Michael Davidson, prepared for what they expected to be another straightforward passage. Davidson was a man as seasoned as the ship he'd commanded for the past 2 years. Hailing originally from Maine, he was a maritime man through and through. In fact, his father had been a ship's captain before him. The sea was practically in his blood. With over 3 decades of experience, Davidson was known for his cautious approach to maritime safety. Sometime prior, he had captained a vessel with steering problems and requested an escort of 2 tugboats to guide his vessel over 100 miles down the Chesapeake Bay. His employers saw this as far too overly cautious and costly, and according to a former colleague, he was fired for it. Former crew under his command remembered him as a warm figure. One even called him happy-go-lucky. To his crew, he was a mentor and a figure they trusted with their lives. As the El Faro prepared to depart Jacksonville on September 29th, there was little reason to believe this voyage would be different from any other. The cargo was loaded as usual, but as it was, talk began to spread of a storm brewing in the Atlantic. Hurricane Joaquin was a tropical storm that was rapidly gaining strength. But Captain Davidson and his ship had faced many storms before and had always emerged unscathed. The captain endeavoured to track the storm's path using satellite imagery and computer software he'd used before. He believed the El Faro could outrun Joaquin, keeping a safe distance from the storm's worst. He must have felt a deep responsibility for the men and women under his command, and he was determined to see them safely to San Juan. But the sea is a fickle master, and even the most experienced seafarers can find themselves at the mercy of forces beyond their control. As El Faro cast off and made way, the weather, naturally, began to deteriorate. The first day passed uneventfully. By the time September had given way to October, the mood aboard the El Faro had shifted. Dark clouds loomed low on the horizon, and the wind began to howl with increasing ferocity. Joaquin was no longer a distant threat, it was a living, breathing beast of a storm, and it was closing in fast. It was now a Category 4, with winds exceeding 130 miles over 209 kilometers per hour. The ship began to lurch and groan as the waves grew larger, and the ocean became a churning mass of fury. On the bridge, Captain Davidson remained resolute, maintaining constant communication with the shore and receiving updates on the storm's path. His plan was to skirt the edge of Joaquin, but the storm proved unpredictable, and its intensity was far greater than anyone had anticipated. Joaquin was unlike any storm Davidson had encountered before. It seemed to defy expectations, shifting course unpredictably and gaining strength at an alarming rate. What had initially been a manageable front now threatened to overpower even the most experienced captain and crew. On the early morning of October 1st, an El Faro crew member, Danielle Randolph, sent a nervous message home to her parents saying, "Not sure if you've been following the weather at all, but there is a hurricane out here and we're heading straight into it. Winds are super bad, and seas are not great." As the ship pressed on, the waves grew higher, crashing against El Faro with a force that reverberated throughout the hull. The wind howled like a living entity, whipping across the deck and making even the most mundane tasks difficult. El Faro's progress slowed as the engines struggled against the mounting waves, but then disaster struck, and they failed altogether. Now this is a death blow for any large ship. Loss of propulsion means the vessel cannot point its bow into the worst of the wind and the waves. It's left completely at the mercy of the ocean and can be battered about like a toy in a bathtub. Being hammered from all angles, El Faro was completely helpless. Water had begun to seep into the cargo holds, causing the ship to list dangerously up to 15 degrees onto her side. The crew must have fought valiantly to keep the ship afloat, sealing off flooded compartments and attempting to restore the power, but the situation was spiraling out of control. Early in the morning of the 1st, Captain Davidson called Tote Maritime's emergency line.
Thursday morning, 0700, we have a navigational incident. I'll keep it short. A scuttle popped open on T-deck, and we were having some free communication of water go down the three holes. Had a pretty good rest. I want to just touch it, contact you verbally here. Everybody's safe, but I want to talk to you.
Are you connecting me through to a QI?
That's what I'm getting right now, is seeing who is on call, and I'm going to get you right to them. Give me 1 second, sir. I'm going to put you on a quick hold. So 1 moment, please. Okay, sir. I just need your name, please.
Yes, ma'am. My name is Michael Davidson.
Ship's name?
El Faro.
Spell that?
Oh, man. The clock is ticking. Can I please speak with a QI? I have a marine emergency, and I would like to speak to a QI. We had a hull breach. A scuttle blew open during a storm. We have water down in 3 holes with a heavy lift. We've lost the main propulsion unit. The engineers cannot get it going. Can I speak with a QI, please?
Yes, thank you so much. 1 moment.
In the face of the circumstances, there was little that could be done. The storm was too fierce. Helicopters could be swept from the sky by the wind speed alone. El Faro and her crew were on their own. The crew continued to battle the elements, but the odds were stacked against them. The El Faro, once resilient and steadfast, was now a helpless giant battered by waves and wind. The containers in the cargo holds broke free, crashing into one another as the ship tilted further to one side, all the vehicles and trailers slamming into the bulkheads with every roll of the ship. The crew knew that the only hope of survival lay in keeping the El Faro afloat long enough for rescue teams to reach them, but with each passing minute, that hope must have grown dimmer. The flooding in the cargo holds worsened, and the list of the ship became more severe. Then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, sometime around 7:20 AM, the radio and the phone lines from the El Faro went silent. Incredibly, despite the horrendous conditions, the US Coast Guard actually launched a daring search and rescue operation, with HC-130 Hercules and Jayhawk helicopters soaring out to battle the same weather that El Faro had. The Coast Guard cutter, the Northland, braved the waves later in the day, and despite insane winds up to 190 kilometers or 115 miles per hour, they searched a huge swathe of ocean for the ship, but to no avail. Soon, on the 4th of October, Hurricane Joaquin abated, and at last conditions improved enough for a larger search. From above, an orange life ring was spotted by an aircraft. Back ashore, families waited, sleepless and on pins and needles for a scrap of good news, for days. But then all hopes were sunk when a bloated and battered body in heavy storm gear was spotted from the air, but not recovered. Then search crews spotted rescue suits, broken life rafts, and even an empty, swamped lifeboat. It was clear that the worst had happened. The El Faro had gone down, swallowed by the raging ocean. The ship, along with all 33 souls aboard, was lost. All that was left were scattered debris fields across hundreds of miles of ocean, and no one body was ever recovered. The loss of the El Faro sent shockwaves through the maritime community. How could a modern cargo ship equipped with the latest technology be lost like that? The questions piled on, but the answers were slow in coming. One thing was certain: something had gone terribly wrong. The implications would change the industry forever. It was up to the NTSB, the US National Transport Safety Board, to launch an investigation and figure out what had gone wrong. But first, they needed to find the wreck. A US Navy ocean-going tugboat, the Apache, set out with a towed side-scan sonar to sweep the sea floor from above and find a wreck that may match El Faro's dimensions. Sure enough, after over a week of searching, a contact was made with a huge hulk on the sea floor. A remotely operated vehicle was sent down to film, and out of the murk, at 15,000 feet of depth, nearly 5 kilometers deep, the name El Faro appeared on screens, and the ship had been found. The NTSB and the US Coast Guard began piecing together the events that led to the sinking, and the findings were sobering. Nearly a full year after the sinking, the NTSB was provided a shocking, tragic clue. The vessel's voice recorder, similar to the black box of an aircraft, had recorded the last conversations aboard the ship after the radios had fallen silent. Investigators listened as from El Faro's bridge, Captain Davidson struggled to coordinate his crew and effect an evacuation. His ship was sinking, but the wind and the seas were so formidable that abandoning ship seemed like a horrifying prospect. He called out, "Bow is down, before calling to his crew on the ship's radio system, "Get into your rafts, throw all your rafts into the water, everybody get off the ship, stay together." The ship, laden with cargo and with massive, voluminous holds, sank like a stone. In his last moments, Davidson struggled to help a crewman from the bridge as it flooded. "You're okay, come on," he called out. The crewman responded, "I need a ladder, a line, I need someone to help me." Davidson called back, "I'm not leaving you, and it's time to come this way." But then the recording stopped. The voice recorder and Davidson's final commands painted a much clearer picture for the NTSB about the ship's death throes. It became clear that a combination of factors had led to the tragedy. First was the decision to sail into the path of the rapidly intensifying storm. This was a critical error. Captain Davidson was an experienced and confident skipper, but the confidence in his ship and her abilities to navigate around Joaquin had been misplaced. In fact, the US Coast Guard and the NTSB put nearly the entire blame for the disaster on Captain Davidson's head. He had died trying to save his crew, a valiant final effort to be sure, but they should not have been there in the first place. Their ship was not as capable as they might have hoped. First, clues came from former crew members who told investigators they were shocked El Faro had gone to sea at all that September because of what they called holes forming in the ship's structure. They called El Faro a rust bucket. An examination of her sister ship, the El Yunque, revealed that the issue was not just restricted to El Faro, but the entire fleet. Patches of rust had been allowed to eat through critical bulkheads. The shocking lack of maintenance flew in the face of conventional maritime practices, and of course, it's the captain's duty to ensure that all's well with the ship. But the operators, Tote Maritime, were censured for this critical lack of maintenance across the fleet, and El Yunque was scrapped shortly afterward. Then, the NTSB's investigation threw an incriminating charge at the US Coast Guard, that the USCG authorised ships like El Faro to carry and use open-topped lifeboats, which would prove hopelessly inadequate during a storm. Without a roof or any kind of protection from the elements, crew members would be as good as dead in open-top boats like that. In fact, there was very little practical difference between them and lifeboats found on ships all the way back in the 1800s. The NTSB also criticised Captain Davidson's decision-making. He had ignored his crew's warnings and requests to alter course, and soon it was revealed he was making decisions based on incorrect information from a simple, private commercial weather service called Bon Voyage. It's easy to understand and use, but in doing so he'd ignored the National Weather Service's hurricane warnings and steamed his vessel straight into Joaquin's path. With El Faro at the mercy of the storm, the ship's structural integrity was pushed to the maximum, but she was badly maintained, full of holes, and in terrible peril. A simple scuttle or hatch failed, allowing ingress of huge amounts of water which could flow rapidly through the ship thanks to corroded bulkheads and pipes. The resulting list meant the engines couldn't sustain the required lubrication pressure, and they failed, essentially dooming the ship. The NTSB found the final nail in the coffin. El Faro lacked even a simple, approved damage control plan. The ship had blundered into a horrendous storm, lacking even the basic tools required to deal with the kind of punishment she was subjected to, all except for her crew's rugged determination and grit. They had fought to the end. In response to the disaster, a series of reforms were implemented to improve the safety of ships and their crews. The NTSB and the Coast Guard issued recommendations that led to sweeping changes in the industry, including stricter regulations on ships' maintenance and more advanced weather monitoring systems. The disaster also highlighted the need for improved training for ships' crews, particularly in emergency procedures around crisis management and damage control. But one of the most significant changes was the revision of the Safety of Life at Sea, or SOLAS regulations, particularly concerning the design and functionality of the lifeboats. New rules were established mandating that vessels of El Faro's type and age had to be equipped with enclosed lifeboats that were capable of withstanding severe conditions at sea. The open lifeboats that had been standard on many ships, including the El Faro, were now recognised as totally inadequate in extreme weather. The tragedy had shown that in a storm as fierce as Joaquin, these lifeboats offered little protection and virtually no hope of survival. They could be swamped and sunk in a minute or less. There is, of course, a lot more to the El Faro story. If you've enjoyed this overview and want to find out the full story, head on over to our friend Sam and his channel Brick and Mortar for a spectacular documentary on the ship and the unbelievable chain of events leading up to her loss. It's one of my favourite videos he's ever done. Today, the El Faro lies over 15,000 feet beneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, resting on the seabed, far from the shore her crew had battled to reach. She's a silent monument to the 33 souls who went down with her, yet another ship whose broken wreck reminds us of what happens when we ignore reason and challenge the might of nature.